further to that, I think that this agreement is very important to both Canada and the European Union for a simple reason on both sides. If the European Union is unable to conclude this agreement, it will basically be a statement that says we can't get it done with developed countries. And that's going to be, that would be very detrimental to the European policy going forward. They've taken a big gamble to launch these negotiations. I mean, this is, as Fred will attest, this is a significant change of their policy from a few years back. If Canada is unable to conclude these negotiations, it's going to basically be an admission that the future of Canada lies in continental North America, which would be, depending on what your outlook is. I mean, if your outlook is that that's fine, and there's been a lot in the newspapers lately about Michael Ignatieff and George Grant and so on, and his lament for a nation, well then, if they're not able to conclude this agreement, one could come to the conclusion that it is a lament for a nation. I don't think that that will occur. In terms of the sectors that it will actually, that will benefit from this agreement, it's difficult to tell at this stage. I think that you have to probably look at the sectors where there's the largest. I mean, on the Canadian economy, you've got 1/3 of the TSX index is financial services, or was, and 1/3 is energy. So 60% of the Canadian economy seems to be tied up in these two areas, energy and resources. So obviously those are going to be the areas that there's going to be a benefit. I'd say you probably need to look at more specific elements to that. The mobility of professionals, engineers, project managers, lawyers, those types of things, they'll benefit. Capital could benefit if indeed financial services is put into the agreement. For instance, there could be a mutual recognition of stock exchanges, which would make listing requirements easier for companies on both sides of the Atlantic, and it would expedite the flow of capital. I think you'll see more collaboration on science and technology, maybe in areas like carbon capture and storage, new energy technology, so those will be in areas that will benefit. Procurement, if there's an agreement, this agreement will need to have some sort of provisions for procurement. The most obvious elements of that will be public transit and large government contracts. So you'll see more activity in sort of high-speed rail, streetcars, those sorts of things. I think you could see activity in the area of public-private partnerships and the building of healthcare facilities, schools, those types of areas. So to pick out sectors is difficult because there's a relative imbalance between the two economies. One's 30 million people, natural resource based. The other one is more of a services, a more advanced in a sense, industrial economy. It seeks its resources, generally speaking, outside of continental Europe. And it's also 10 times at least the size in terms of population. So that's really the take that I think that we put on.
One of the reasons I'm asking this question this way has to do with being out here in the West. Sometimes talking to people, it seems like Europe is so far apart, even from the business sectors. They're looking to Asia, they're looking also to the US, obviously. So the interest towards Europe is not, to put it mildly, not very advanced. And then if I tie in the sectors with whom they are doing business with, one gets the impression that a lot of the current activities, that is exclude investment, trade in goods and services, has its location in the eastern part of Canada. And given the fact, what we just heard, that it needs obviously the support of provinces. So if you tie in this argument or this consideration, would you be still very optimistic that things can be moved
The support
along?
of provinces?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we shared a cab up here, and we were talking that, sometimes the best way to get rid of internal barriers is through a third party pressure. And I think that Canada needs that. This is the type of agreement that could help leverage, provide the type of leverage that's necessary to open. I mean, the champion of this agreement is Jean Charest. And we can, our organization set up a meeting with him in 2006, and basically the agreement, and there was strong support from the then ambassador of the European Commission. It said, he said, I will take care of the provinces, you take care of the business community in terms of supporting this thing. And he was good to his word. And I think the provinces are very, very behind this. And at the same time, the federal government has made a significant shift to allow them to participate more aggressively in the negotiations. So it's a new chapter. I mean, as long as this thing can be completed, it's a new chapter in trade negotiations for Canada at least, and Europe as well. So
right. So Fred, would you share this kind of impression now from a European delegation point of view? And first and second, then again, the same kind of basic question. Given the fact that Europe is important for Canada in terms of trade, but it's not the other way around. So if there wouldn't be this kind of agreement coming up with the Canadian government, Europe wouldn't lose out too much. So what's the driving force? Is there a kind of geopolitical motive behind it? Is it what we just heard, an overall rethinking of the approach towards those kind of FTAs, or what's the driving force dealing in this way with Canada?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you again for the Institute for organizing this. It is a very timely fashion. We're not yet into negotiations. We are at a stage where we're both getting mandates, and hopefully that will be announced on May 6th, but we're not there yet. But there's been quite a lot of work done on that. I should mention first we did this joint study, which followed from the Berlin Summit, and that's where Professor Woolcock has made some of the gains. And I should point out that those are those gains are basically assuming a WTO agreement, and on those there are things that are quantifiable. So there is a whole lot of other aspects in the joint study that is not quantifiable, that just couldn't be estimated as to what the gains would be. But presumably with a closer economic relationship, it will come there. Secondly, the Commission is not talking about free trade. We're talking about a type of agreement that's much wider than free trade. This may be a matter of terminology. Sometimes there's maybe concern that a number of the Canadian free trade agreements have been very much more first generation, mainly federal competency type agreements. We, of course, the Commission is looking into areas of procurement, services, investment, all of which have to have significant provincial buy-in. So as Jason has mentioned, the provincial buy-in is actually key. It was one of the points that was raised by the Commission consistently. Canada seemed to have heard the message. The provinces have heard the message. We've had, I think, an unprecedented statements by the provinces for the Council of Federation, and letters from ministers, both federally and provincially, basically assuring that there is provincial buy-in. Now, how that buy-in is going to be done, I don't know. It will depend on the negotiations, and that will depend on how the provinces and the federal government want to deal with it. But certainly there is a general idea that the provinces will be involved in some way or another, but that's up to the Canadian authorities to decide how that will be. Certainly within areas of their own jurisdiction, that's probably the areas that would be looking at. What is their jurisdiction? Sometimes that's a gray area. Did I miss something else, I think?
No, but that's you would join Jason saying there is a good reason for being optimistic that things will finally launch on May 6th, and do you have any kind of time frame in mind you could elaborate a bit about for our audience? Given the overall framework we are in, I guess so. If the EU-Canada agreement would set a kind of tone in the current protectionist atmosphere, this would be a nice point, I guess so.
Well, that is.
But it seems to me that it's all a bit, it flies pretty low profile so far.
Well, I mean, it's like I said. I mean, if we get into negotiations, that will set a good tone vis-a-vis the current world economic and financial crisis. I think that's part of one of the motivations. That's not the only motivation. There's other motivations for the EU to get into that. Canada's been a good partner. I would say that even the just going back on a tangent, Professor Woolcock mentioned that the global Europe wasn't even looking at Canada at the beginning as the first round of free trade partners.